Okay, I think we started. Hello, everyone. I will do a quick intro. My name is Astrid from Cafetalk. And I hope you can hear me well and see me well. If you can hear everything, please just write a quick comment in the chat box. Oops. Sorry, my sound was on. Today I have two tutors here with me from Ireland, Emily and Callum. Hello, thank you for joining me today. And they will tell us a little bit about mythical creatures from Ireland and also about local festivals. And I will just do a quick introduction in Japanese as well. 皆さん、こんにちは。本日はシンポジウムご参加ありがとうございます。カフェトークのアセと申します。本日は、アイルランド出身のエミリー先生とカルム先生、がアイルランドのお祭りと伝説の生き物について教えてくれます。ありがとうございます。そして今日は、キャンペーンとしてライブ配信中に、コメントをくれた方の中から当選で、5名様に、500ポイントプレゼントする、予定ありますので、ぜひいろいろコメントや先生に対しての、ご質問を送ってください。日本語でも英語でもどちらでもコメントをいただけます。ありがとうございます。So then I think we can get started. Emily, if you're ready, feel free to get started on your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily. I'm from Ireland, and I'm a tutor on Cafetalk as well. So this is my presentation. It's local Irish festivals. So we'll have a look. First of all, a little bit about me. I'm just trying to switch over my slide here. One second. Anyway, I am from the southeast of Ireland in a place called Wexford, and I am from there, and then I lived in Dublin as well for about 5 years, and since then I've been living in Southeast Asia for almost 2.5 years now, and I'm currently in Indonesia. I've done my presentation on local cultural festivals. So we have a lot of these in Ireland on some different and niche topics. So there's something for everybody, really. So they're a lot of fun to attend if you're ever in Ireland. I am an English teacher. I've been teaching English for just over 2 years now, and I recently started with Cafetalk, so I'm excited to meet some new people. All right, and so I'm just going to go over my first 4 here. I'm just trying to get the hang of this, sorry, and change my slide over. So the 4 festivals I'm going to be covering are the Listún Barna Matchmaking Festival, and the Galway Oyster Festival, the Flacul, and the National Ploughing Championships. All right, so I'm going to start with the Listún Barna Matchmaking Festival. That's the first one we'll talk about today. All right. So my next slide, we are on the town of Listún Barna. So it's in County Clare, which is on the west coast of Ireland, as you can see on the map. And it's right on the coast. It's a very small town of less than 1,000 people. And Listún Barna is a very long place name, and it comes from the Irish here, Listún Barna, and it's been written phonetically in English like that. And what is a matchmaker and what is matchmaking? So the process of matchmaking here on my next slide is the act of setting 2 people up or bringing them together, arranging a romantic relationship. And this can be, casually through family or friends. They might know 2 people who they think would work and set them up, but it can also be a profession. So a matchmaker is the person who arranges those romantic relationships. And there's not many of those left anymore. And the man who runs this festival is considered to be like the last traditional matchmaker in Ireland. So on my next one here, we have some things that happen in the festival. So it's a big gathering of people from all over the country come to the small town, and anyone over the ages of 18 are welcome. And it's 30 days of constant entertainment, music, and dancing every day, every evening. And there's also daily matchmaking sessions with the matchmaker. So this man who arranges relationships will talk to people every day and get to know them and set them up with each other the best way possible. So it's every day from the 1st to the 30th of September. So we're in the middle of it currently. It's currently going on in Lisdoonvarna. All right, my next one here, we have a bit about the matchmaker. So this is Willie Daly. He is a third generation matchmaker. So his father and his grandfather were also matchmakers. And he is credited with over 30,000 marriages. So yeah, he's considered very successful. And he has this book, which you can see in the picture on the left, that he calls his lucky book. And if you touch it, you are hopefully to be married within the next 6 to 9 months. And we have a clip here of him speaking about the festival coming up this year, the one that's happening now. And he's from the west coast of Ireland, and he speaks quite quickly with quite a strong accent. So we could have a listen and see if we can understand what he's saying. It might be a bit more of a challenge than listening to myself or Callum, because it's quite a rural local accent. So if we have this video set up, I think we can play it.
Well, I expect this year, and I do firmly believe that this year for the matchmaking at Lisdoonvarna will be just great, because there's a very renewed hunger for love. You know, people are back out again now after being restricted for some periods of time, that they're back out and they're making up for ground. And I think it gave people a big chance to reevaluate their lives a bit, you know, and realise that being alone is not good. It's nicer to share your life with someone and be with someone that you love and that you want to be with for the rest of your life. So I think Lisdoonvarna will provide that opportunity for people to find that lovely love, and people they're very determined now. As I said, there's a very noticeable hunger in people for sharing and for love. So I think we'll have a wonderful festival.
All right, so that's just a piece from the matchmaker talking about his hopes for this year's festival. So that's a little bit about Lisdoonvarna. If you are single and looking for a relationship, it's a very fun event where you can meet lots of people. And our next festival is the Galway Oyster Festival. So this is a very different topic, and it's also on the west coast of Ireland in Galway City on this pier called Nimmo's Pier. And Galway City is a lot bigger than Lisdoonvarna. It's got a population of about 84,000 people. And what happens at the Galway Oyster Festival? Well, it is the oldest oyster festival in the world, and it's been going since 1954. And it was quite small when it started in 1954, but since then it's typically attended by over 22,000 people every year. And they've said that more than 3 million oysters have been consumed at the festival since 1954. It's about more than oysters as well. It's a celebration of all seafood, so you'll find lots of lobster, crab, fish, and different ways of cooking and eating it as well. So at the festival, on my next slide here, we have the two main events, the Irish Oyster Opening Championships and the World Oyster Opening Championships. So opening an oyster is also called shucking an oyster. It's a word primarily used for opening any sort of closed shellfish like this, like an oyster or a clam. And there are two main competitions. One is local for people from Ireland and one is international. So people come from all over the world to compete in this competition. And there are also talks and tastings from local restaurants, all seafood based, and plenty of live music and entertainment as well throughout the whole weekend. And there's smaller competitions as well for visitors, such as best dressed. So people go all out on their outfits and try and dress up to win a prize. And there's also an oyster feast off, which is an eating competition. So how many oysters can you eat in a minute? And there's parades as well. you'll find that most of the festivals we have in Ireland have parades, and there's some workshops and cooking demos as well, so you can practice your fish cooking skills. The festival is the last weekend in September every year, because that marks the start of oyster season. So you can know if it's oyster season if the month has the letter R in it. So months from September to April all have the letter R, and they are all in season for oysters. And then May, June, July, August are not in season for oysters. So rule of thumb is to only eat oysters in those seasons. And if you find them in the other seasons, they are probably not fresh, they might be frozen. All right, on the next one here, we have some pictures of the festival throughout the years. So on the left, these are from the 60s and the 80s, and we see the competition there. We see the difference between the one on the left and the one on the right. The one on the right is from last year, and they are all wearing gloves, and health and safety is a bit different because the tool you use is quite sharp, so we want to be careful with that. But it's the same idea, the same kind of events, but just slightly different. All right, the next festival we're going to look at is the Flacule. So this is in the Midlands. It's in Mullingar in County Westmeath this year, but it changes location every year. So Flacule means music festival. So Fla means festival and Ceol is music. So the population of Mullingar is 22,600 as of now, so bigger than Lisdoonvarna, but much smaller than Galway City. All right. On our next one here, so the Flacule was first held in Mullingar in 1951. So it's in Mullingar this year, but it also started there. So it started originally with the goal of creating some standards in Irish traditional music through competition. So they basically wanted a way to know who was best at different categories. They have solo competitions, bands, duos, trios, and they wanted to basically rank who was the best in each category. And it's grown huge, and 20,000 people compete in these competitions every year, and the largest one having 600,000 people attend in 2018. And that would be attendances, not all competitors. So what happens in the festival? Our next one here, it's mainly competitive. People go to compete. There are bigger competitions, smaller competitions, competitions for kids, competitions for all sorts of levels and instruments and abilities. But there's also a lot for people who don't play music or who just want to listen. There's concerts and parades and sessions and céileatha. So a session would be a more casual music session, a music concert. So maybe you don't plan it so much beforehand, or maybe you play with strangers and they get together and they kind of experiment a bit, and we call that a session. And then céileatha is plural for céilí, and céilí is like a social event. So it incorporates like a lot of Irish dancing, and there's usually live traditional music, but also a lot of dancing in twos and fours. There's also different workshops, like Irish language workshops. So a lot of Irish people don't really speak much Irish anymore. So there's workshops if you want to brush up on your Irish, or if you've never tried it before, you can try it out. You can also try out some instruments. If you don't play these instruments, you can experiment with them, get a lesson from a teacher. We're going to see some of these instruments on the next one. So this one's already happened. This festival was in August. It lasted for a week. So our instruments, these are popular instruments in Irish traditional music, and you'll see a lot of them at the Flacule. So the first one is a bodhrán. So it has a wooden frame, and it's covered in like goat hide, so goat skin. And we have this small stick, which you hold in the middle, and you kind of twist your wrist to play it with both sides, like a small handheld drum. We have the uilleann pipes at the bottom. So you might have heard of the bagpipes before. The bagpipes are Scottish, and uilleann pipes are Irish. So they might be a bit of an acquired taste. They're a very high-pitched sound, but it takes a lot of skill to play them. It's a very complex instrument. And in the middle, we have the harp. So this is the national symbol of Ireland. So it's a common misconception that it's like the shamrock, the four-leaf clover, but it's actually the harp, and it's on our coins, it's on our stamps, it's everywhere. And then our other instrument is the fiddle, and the fiddle looks like a violin, and it is essentially the same as a violin. Some people argue over what the different categorization is between fiddle and violin, and a lot of people say it's just the type of music it's used to play. When we're talking about trad Irish music, we call it a fiddle. Talking about classical music, you might call it a violin. Depends on your perspective, but physically they're quite the same. All right, and our last festival is the National Ploughing Championships. So this is also in the Midlands. It's in Ratheniska in County Laois. So I actually couldn't find a population count for Ratheniska because it's that small. I imagine small on the links of Lisdoonvarna rather than the cities. But the population of the whole county here is 91,600. So it's quite a small county in itself as well. All right, on our next page here, we have some facts about it. So it's Europe's largest outdoor event, and it's huge. It's 900 acres, and they rent out a lot of farmland to host the event. And around 300,000 visitors come to the event every year, especially in recent years. It's very popular. And among those are some exhibitors. So companies, businesses come to promote their events or their own services or products. We get about 1,700 of those each year as well. And this one is very old. It comes from the 30s, and it started off as an argument between friends. So one friend from this county and another one from my hometown, actually, they were arguing about whose men could plough the best. So they had a competition, and it's been done every year since. So on the next one, we have, what is ploughing? So we see in the bottom right-hand corner is a plough. So it's a machine, and to break, loosen, and turn up the earth with this machine, a plough. And we do it before we want to sow something in the soil. So it uproots the weeds and aerates it, circulates air throughout it so that it can be in a good condition for sowing. So this is the main event. There is classes and competitions on ploughing, but there's so much more as well. And you can see on the left-hand side, kind of a bird's eye view of the festival. And it just goes on and on because it's 900 acres. So it's physically huge. And they're all set up in tents, all the different events and businesses. So on the next slide here, we can see some of the events at the festival. So they've got fashion shows, sheep shearing, threshing. Threshing is to separate the grain from the rest of the plant. So for example, like in wheat, like in the graphic in the top right corner, you want to separate the grain. So you can do that by hitting the bushel, or you can have machines that do it as well. So they have competitions for that. There is a motor show, so car show, and some of these are vintage as well. So people will bring their vintage cars and show them off and talk to people with the same interests. And there's craft and cooking demonstrations as well. So plenty of things for all kind of interests. And they've got livestock exhibitions, so you can show off your sheep, cattle, horses, any animals that you're proud of. And the most important part is the ploughing classes and competitions. They also have an innovation area. So this is for agri-tech, so agriculture technology. So this is important for farmers to stay up to date on the latest farming equipment and technology. And it's a big kind of conference where you can see what the current trends are and the best places to invest. And they also have, I think, 30 small businesses that they invite every year. So it gives businesses in the area a chance to promote themselves at the beginning stages. And this festival is just over a weekend, and it's coming up on the 19th of September. All right, I think, that is our last festival. So thank you so much for listening. We have a lot of different and niche festivals in Ireland for kind of all sorts of interests. So if you're planning a trip to Ireland, I would definitely recommend trying to go to something that you're interested in. They're all over the country, and it's a great opportunity to do something different with your trip. Like I said before, my tutor name is Emily S., like you see there on the screen, and I have English classes on Cafetalk for beginners, intermediate, advanced students, and kids as well. So my most common lesson is a English reading and discussion lesson, and we can use different materials based on your interests and your age level, and I typically read through them to work on pronunciation and then have a natural discussion to work on sentence structure and fluency. But I also have other types of lessons on there as well for kids, or interview prep, or learning through games, lots of variety. So whatever you're interested in, we can tailor the lesson to you. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was really great. And we actually have a lot of comments from the students. So I just wanted to read some of those out to you. And Callum, feel free to chime in as well. Some of them, I think, are a bit general about Ireland as well. So feel free to answer together if you want to. Danny is saying, hi, Emily. Which one is your favorite festival?
Oh, I think my favorite festival is the Galway Oyster Festival because I really love seafood and shellfish. So any opportunity to learn how to cook it better, but also taste it. And they have a lot of tasting festivals from really impressive restaurants in the local area. So I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, it looked really delicious also from the pictures you had. He is, I think, saying hello in Irish. I'm not confident to pronounce it correctly, so I'm going to skip this one. But it afterwards says, I'm going to Ireland this month. I love Ireland. Thank you for today's opportunity. So yeah, the last festival you mentioned is happening later, so they might be able to actually catch that when they go this month, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the first one is on the whole month of September, so they'll be in time for that too.
Yeah, and Hido is asking, have any Japanese attended the Lisdoonvarna Matchmaking Festival?
I don't know, to be honest, but I know it's open to everyone from any background or culture. If you're interested in looking for a relationship or getting the help of a matchmaker, you won't be turned away.
Oh, that's wonderful. Sumi Hino is also saying, so where is it? I like oysters. I would like to go and join this festival in the near future. Someone else also saying, I love oysters too. Hope to visit there in the future. Miwa's asking, can you understand the Irish language? So I think that might be for both of you.
Sure. So my Irish skills aren't as good as they used to be. A lot of Irish people don't speak Irish, but we learn it in school from ages 5 all the way up to when you finish. But we don't use it often in day-to-day conversation. So yeah, I can understand a fair bit of it, and I used to be able to speak it quite well, but I've not used it in recent years, so I've definitely lost a lot of my ability.
Okay, I see. Ruby is saying, I've never seen uilleann pipes. I want to hear the sound. That might be something that people can find on YouTube, maybe. There's probably some samples.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Sure. We have a student also saying, I've been to Ireland over 20 years ago, so that's probably nice to have a bit of nostalgia here. Are most Irish people able to dance the Irish dance?
Not everybody. A lot of people are really into it and they take classes when they're young. Some people stay in it. I know in my school we did it as part of PE, like as part of physical education. You learn the basics of Irish dancing. So we call them like your 1, 2, 3s, like the basic steps. So I think a lot of Irish people would know their 1, 2, 3s, but maybe not much more than that.
Okay, I see. Then maybe the last one before we go to the next presentation. Why are lots of festivals going on during September? Is it because of the harvest? Or for the good weather?
Yeah, I'd say it's a combination. So I'd say the good weather has a lot to do with festivals such as like the Flacciol or the Lisdoonvarna, because a lot of it is outdoors. For the Oyster Festival, it's in September because September is the first month of like the oyster harvest. So it marks the start of the season. And for the Ploughing Championships, yeah, I would say it's to do with the harvest.
Yeah, it would probably be because Ireland was such an agricultural country for such a long time. before the harvest would have been the most stressful time of year, and then once the harvest was taken in, it would kind of be a period to relax before preparing for the winter.
Yeah, and to kind of celebrate all you accomplished until that point, probably, right? Okay,
and
thank
the
you so
weather.
much. Yeah, great. Then, Callum, if you're ready, we can start with your presentation. And everybody, feel free to keep writing comments. We can check them again after the presentation until we're out of time. So feel free to keep writing anything that you're wondering about.
Okay, thank you. Hi everybody. My name is Callum. My current name on Cafetalk is Teacher Callum, but I keep on meaning to change it. So if you look me up, it might be changed to Callum L by now. I'm going to do a short presentation on Irish mythical creatures. So when talking about Irish mythology, can I get to the next slide, please? We're talking about the body of myths and legends surrounding the island of Ireland. All these stories we passed down orally from prehistoric times, and they would have come from the Celtic tradition and Celtic religion. But then eventually, a lot of them would have been written down by Christian scribes, and they might have Christianized the legends or the myths to some extent. So on the next slide, you can see that Irish mythology is usually broken down into 4 cycles. So we have the mythological cycle, the Ulster cycle, the Fenian cycle, and the King cycle. The mythological cycle kind of talks about the former gods of Ireland and where Irish people might have came from. And it's the least well preserved and even to most Irish people, the least well known of the Irish mythological cycles. One of the most famous is the Ulster cycle, which is the area that I'm from. The Ulster cycle takes place around the 1st century AD, and it takes place mostly in the provinces of Ulster and Connacht. Then the Fenian cycle, I'd say, is probably the most famous, and it focuses on kind of the famous heroes of Ireland and famous battles and famous wars fought in Ireland. And it takes place around the 3rd century AD, and it takes place in the provinces of Leinster and Munster, so the south and east side of the country. And then finally, the last cycle is the King cycle, and it focuses on it kind of is taken from. This is when kind of Christianization has started to make an impact, and this is stories written down by Irish bards and scribes, and it talks about kings in Ireland and lineage, and a lot of people can track their own lineage to stories from the King cycle. But today, I'm not going to focus on mythology in general. I'm just going to focus on some famous mythological creatures in Ireland. So on the next slide, you can see a list of all our Irish mythological creatures. In Irish mythology, there's so many. This is just a drop in the water, but some of these are very well known, like the leprechaun and maybe the banshee, and some of them might be a little bit more unheard of. So we're just going to run through them very quickly, but if you want to look them up yourself later, there's a lot more information on each of them. So the first one is kind of the most important in Ireland, and that's the how do you pronounce it? Easci, that's it, of course. Easci, yeah, and which are Irish fairies. Easci have many different names in Irish mythology. Where I'm from, we call them Dinyawa, which is like the good people. And when we're talking about Irish fairies, it's kind of, they're usually shown as shapeshifters. So they can take the shape of many different animals, but sometimes they also take the shape of humans, but with animal features. For example, maybe having donkey ears or a pig snout or maybe a tail. The defining feature about Irish fairies are their supernatural abilities and their temperament. So the kind of rule is if they're treated with respect and treated kindly, they can be kind in return. They can be quite nice and can be quite rewarding to be friends with the fairies. But if you don't treat them with respect or if you act cruel towards them, they will be very cruel back to you. Fairies are usually shown to be living underground. They live in trees and they live in ring forts all around Ireland. And these are still seen today. And sometimes they make they kind of pop up in pop culture because they might change how we do things in Ireland. For example, very notably in 1999, there was a large motorway, a highway being built in Ireland, and when a local storyteller told the road workers that they were going to destroy a ferry bush, he was able to get the whole motorway rerouted so as to not disturb it. So there, a lot of respect for the Irish ferries in Ireland. On our next slide, we have the puka, and the puka is a spirit in Irish folklore, and puka comes from the Irish for goblin. Pukas can also take the shape of many animals, but most commonly they take the shape of rabbits and horses. The thing that pukas are known for is to play tricks on humans. So usually they're quite benign, if a little bit mischievous, but sometimes they can be quite harmful. So you have to be very careful with a puka. They're found in many rural locations, especially in areas where they can run freely in horse form, like on the sides of mountains. And they're also found in puka pools, which are small ponds or lakes in the middle of rivers, including the most famous Irish rivers like the River Liffey that flows through Dublin has some puka pools on it. So that is a puka. It's very similar to a poltergeist. On our next one, we have the Abertach and the Jaragdu, and these are both kind of like the Irish equivalent of a vampire. The Abertach comes from the Old Irish term for dwarf, and Jaragdu literally means red bloodsucker. The Abertach is said to look like a typical vampire, and meanwhile the Jaragdu has a bit of a story behind it. In the story, it was before the Jaragdu became a vampire, she was a beautiful woman who had a very difficult life. She was sold off to be married at a young age, and she died very unfortunately, very unhappy, and then she arose from the grave again as the Jaragdu, which is a terrifying, monstrous-looking vampire, somewhat kind of to take her revenge. Both can drain the blood or the life from living people, and it's said that if you wanted to destroy an Abertach or destroy a Jaragdu, you'd need to destroy them with a sword made from the wood of a yew tree. You'd have to bury them upside down, and you'd have to cover the grave with a very heavy stone so they wouldn't be able to come back from the grave. The Abertach is found in the northwest of the country, kind of where I'm from, especially in the parish of Errigal in Derry, and the Jaragdu is more found on the southeast side of the country, around about County Waterford. So that's the Abertach and the Jaragdu. The next one we have is the Fjargorta, and the Fjargorta literally means man of hunger or man of famine. And these spirits usually pop up around the times of famine, and they take the shape of a starving or emaciated man. They walk the earth during times of famine, and they can actually be quite lucky because they walk the earth seeking alms or seeking charity, some food or some money. And if you gave money to a Fjargorta, you would be rewarded in turn for being kind and being generous. But on the other side of things, Fjargorta are also kind of seen as a harbinger of famine, so they might bring the famine themselves. So it's kind of conflicting stories. And Fjargortas are supposedly come around from regular people who walk on hungry grass, which is just pieces of grass that have been cursed by fairies. And it's said that anyone that walks on hungry grass are perpetually starving. They can never eat enough food. And that's where the Fjargorta comes from. They look a little bit like a zombie, in my own opinion. Our next one is the Dullahan. The Dullahan comes from the Irish Duvlachan, which means a dark sullen person, but another word for the Dullahan is Gan Cion, which literally means without head. So there's a famous similar figure in British mythology called the Headless Horseman, and it's kind of the same thing. It's a headless horseman or a headless coachman, and they're often seen as the coachman to the afterlife. So if you die, this is the person who will show up to bring you into the afterlife. So they can be not necessarily a bad spirit in some stories, but in some stories, other stories, they can be quite dangerous. Some say that his eyes are constantly on fire, that he uses a whip that's made out of a human spine, and if you see him and you're not supposed to see him, you might go blind. So definitely wouldn't want to see him myself. The Dullahan is found near graveyards, or is also supposed to come from a carnal vault, so like a very fancy tomb of a wicked aristocrat. Where a wicked aristocrat is buried is where you'll find the Dullahan. Okay, and then the next one we have, this is perhaps one of the more famous ones in Irish mythology, is the Banshee. The Banshee comes from Banshida, which means fairy woman or woman of the fairy mount. And to be honest, in my opinion, when I was growing up, this is the Irish mythological creature that terrified me. The Banshee looks like a very pale woman with long dark hair, and she wears a dark cloak over a green dress. And the Banshee is a sign of death. So Banshee heralds the death of a person or one of their family members, and she usually does this by screaming or wailing or shrieking or keening. Many different words Irish people like to use for being very loud and scary. The Banshee is found roaming the Irish countryside and hovering just around above the ground like a vapor. And usually she's walking towards her next target, which is the house in the distance, which has someone who is going to unfortunately pass away. When I was younger, I was terrified of the Banshee. Next one we have is the Merrow. And the Merrow comes from the Irish Maruk, which means sea singer or a siren. And this one, similarly to the Headless Horseman, is also well known in other countries. A Merrow is an Irish mermaid. The Merrow are half human. They look like a woman from the waist up, and they look fish-like from the waist down. That are the female Merrow. They're also Merrow men, but they're supposed to be grotesquely ugly. And it's one of the reasons why Merrow, or the female Merrow, like to attract Irish men in the stories into the sea, because their Merrow men are meant to be not very nice to look at. They have green hair, and they groom with combs, and they have some webbing in between their fingers. And they are said to be modest and affectionate and quite kind, but that they could also be trying to trick you to enter the water when you might not get back out. So take with a pinch of salt. Merrow wear a special hat called Cahalín Drew, which is a little black hood, and this allows them to dive beneath the waves. And there's stories in Irish mythology of Merrow losing their hood and not being able to return to the ocean. The Merrow dwell in Tír Fáthún, which is the land beneath the waves, which is under the ocean. Now, the most famous Irish mythological creature that most people would have heard of is the leprechaun. And leprechaun comes from Lucarpón, which means small body. And a leprechaun, very well known, looks like a small bearded man, and they wear a green coat or a green hat or green all over. Usually the leprechauns are cobblers, which means they repair shoes, but they also enjoy practical jokes, and that is kind of what they're most famous for. It's said that you're able to catch a leprechaun, they'll grant you riches, or they'll grant you 3 wishes. Their riches are usually a pot of gold, which is known to be at the end of a rainbow. They're solitary creatures. They're not particularly cruel, but they do not like being told what to do. And so it's kind of, if you treat them with respect, they'll treat you kindly back, but if you mess with them, they're not going to take it very well. Leprechauns are found all across Ireland, on moors or in forests or caves or gardens. This next creature, the Far Jarag, which means red man in Irish, is similar to a leprechaun, and they get mixed up quite often. They're also a small bearded man, but instead of wearing all green, they wear all red. They wear a red coat and a red cap. Or in other stories, they can sometimes be seen as quite fat and have dark, hairy skin and long snouts and skinny tails, which is why they're also sometimes called rat boys. Similarly to the leprechaun, the Far Jarag likes to play practical jokes, but their practical jokes are not funny. They can be quite cruel. One of their more famous practical jokes is kidnapping people and demanding ransom to be released, or perhaps even worse, is stealing Irish babies and replacing them with a changeling, which is a fairy baby that takes the place of a human baby. Far Jarags are also found all over Ireland, and it brings us to our last creature, which, when I was saying growing up that I think the Banshee was the most terrifying Irish mythical creature to me as a child, I think the changeling is now the most terrifying mythical creature to me now. A changeling is a human-like creature or a fairy that is left in place of a human child. They might appear sickly in the crib, or they might not grow in its stereotypical fashion that a normal baby would. They might also have notable physical characteristics like long, sharp, jagged teeth, or maybe a beard, and they might show intelligence or a foresight well beyond their years. Usually, a changeling would be left in the place of a human baby if someone was to look upon a human baby with jealousy. If someone looked at your baby with jealousy, the fairies might come, take your baby, and replace it with a changeling. And so looking at a baby with jealousy used to be seen as very dangerous in Ireland. Changelings live among humans, but they are traditionally from the fairy world. And that's the end of all of our Irish mythical creatures in this slide. I was just wondering, what do you think is what is your most favorite Irish mythical creature, or what is your least favorite Irish mythical creature? And do you have any similar creatures in your culture? Also, I thank you for listening to my presentation. I am currently teaching on Cafetalk, as some of you might know. If you'd like to learn more about Irish mythology, I have a new lesson which talks about Irish myths and legends. And I currently have a 50% discount on all my courses until October 1st, 2023. So if you would like to make a lesson, I'd love to speak with you. And thank you again for listening to my presentation.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. There was a lot of creatures I've never heard before. And we have a lot of more comments. Sumihino is saying Puka, that's a cute name. I think especially compared to Japanese language, Puka sounds a little bit cute.
Thanks.
Denny is saying I love folklore. The Derdu sounds like the Suikuyen from my culture. Do you believe in all of the mythical creatures, and have you experienced any?
Personally, no, not anymore. But when I was a child, I definitely loved hearing the stories, and there was a long period of my life where I would have believed them. And if I had children of my own, I'd definitely love to tell them the same stories, and I'd say they would believe them too.
Okay. Ruby is asking, a friend of mine gave me tarot cards with Irish mythical creatures on them. Thanks to you, I can now understand the meaning of the cards better. By the way, which character is your favorite?
My favorite, I think my favorite might be, the fairies, the Dinyamois. A lot of the mythical creatures, depending on the story, are not a creature in their own right, but they are a type of fairy, like the Farjarag and the leprechaun, even the Puga, and depending on the story, they're all different types of fairies. So I suppose my favorite are the Irish fairies. What about you?
Yeah, I liked the fairies a lot growing up as well. Every Halloween, my dad would take us to nearby fields to go look for the fairies. And I guess your imagination is very fluid when you're young. So I definitely remember seeing little lights across the fields. So it's very exciting when you're young to try and see what you can find. But in terms of the most interesting now, I think is the changeling. I find it very eerie, very creepy. So from a interesting point of view, that one, but it definitely creeps me out the most.
Yeah, it's very scary.
There was a horror movie that came out in Ireland a couple of years ago called Changeling. It's about the Irish version of a changeling, and it's a terrifying movie. So if you want to, if you're recommendation.
Is that actually an Irish movie, or is it more of a Hollywood version of an Irish legend there?
I think there's a famous movie called Changeling with Angelina Jolie, but that's mythological.
It's a different one.
This is an Irish production that came out years ago.
It's much smaller.
Yeah, smaller budget.
Smaller film.
Nice. Yeah, I have to check that out. Then we have one more question. I heard that many Irish people have strong spiritual powers. Is that true?
I don't know. I suppose it depends how much you believe that type of thing. When talking about festivals earlier and talking about harvest festivals, when I was younger and we used to go to harvest festivals, there would typically be 2 or 3 traveling fortune tellers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So maybe, and I think that'd be quite common in Ireland for people to go see fortune tellers.
Is that kind of hand reading or cards or Is there like a typical way to tell fortune?
There's different methods. Some people would do palm reading. Some people would use cards. Some people would just talk to you and base it off your energy and what you say and your aura and everything. I'd say they're quite common, especially in the traveling community. Maybe not so much anymore, but you would still find them easily if you were looking for them in Ireland.
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Because we just talked about movies, one student was saying, I like the movie The Banshees of Inisherin. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one.
Yeah, that's a great movie.
It's very good. Yeah,
very
I'm a
funny.
big fan of that movie. Funny.
But no banshees in it, I don't think.
No, yeah.
In the end.
Yeah.
but it was still a great movie.
Okay, I'll have to check that one out too. The Irish mythical creatures might be adapted or had influence to other countries' fairy tales or stories like Snow White, Mermaid, and so on. Do you think so?
Absolutely, yeah. Especially when you talk about like the kill. A lot of the mythological cycle, the first period of Irish mythology, would have been heavily influenced by the Celts, and there was Celts in Scotland and northwestern mainland Europe and Scandinavia. So I'm sure it spreads from the Celts themselves, which it spread throughout
probably.
the world.
Yeah, Irish like spirits and festivals are very influential everywhere because Halloween comes from Ireland. So it originated there and then it was picked up and commercialized all over the world. So I think Ireland has a big influence on the rest of the world in terms of spirits and creatures and mythology.
Yeah, for sure. Hero is saying, my favorite one is Changeling. Are there any goods like stuffed toys in Ireland? So I'm assuming about mythical creatures. Do you have any like stuffed toy commercial goods versions of your mythical creatures?
I think it'd be difficult to find a stuffed toy of a changeling. Perhaps maybe, well, you definitely find stuffed leprechauns, absolutely. But besides that, I'm not too sure. I don't specifically the creatures in my presentation. I wouldn't want to curl up with them at night.
I guess sometimes also the look is not completely known, so there might be different variations of how they might look, right? So there's probably less than one person. Ruby's saying, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I wish to come across some of these creatures sometime. And Miwa is saying, I haven't heard about the Irish mythical creatures so far. Have you ever heard of Japanese mythical creatures?
No.
I don't think so.
I remember reading that in the Shinto religion, there's a lot of spirits that live in the rivers and the forests. And I've read a few stories about that, but nothing beyond that.
Yeah, that might be interesting to discuss maybe in one of those lessons that you have about creatures that you can exchange a bit what the similarities are between those. And yeah, the last comment I think is nice to close out on. It says, thank you both, great presentation, very interesting and informative. And I think that pretty much sums it up. I thought so too. It was really nice to learn about Ireland from you guys. Thank you so much. And everybody, please feel free to check out Emily's and Callum's lessons and talk a bit more about Ireland if you want to, and join us again for these events in future. I hope everybody had fun, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Asha. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much. See you next time. Bye-bye.